where I was headed sort of with this presentation. The title of the presentation really grabbed me. A social web of networks. I sort of feel like my life has become a web of social networks. And what I wanted to kind of do was frame what I was going to talk about in the sense of a narrative, or how I came to be where I am. And this morning, as I was getting ready for this, I realized that I've been playing in social networks for over a decade, and how did time pass like that? And so I'm going to share a little bit about my journey to using social networks, which will culminate in explaining the tool that we're going to focus on today. Then Greg is going to share a little bit about assessment, and Jonathan is going to talk about the research aspects of social networking. And so when I started out in social networking, it was not because of anything that had to do with educational use at all. I was living in Germany, my whole family was back in the States, and my daughter was participating in a Model United Nations program at The Hague. And the kids that were working in that program were all in the range of 16 to 19 years old, and the way that they communicated with each other was through MySpace. And so I saw her using that space, and I sort of jumped into MySpace and used it while I was living in Germany. And then when I came back to the United States, what I realized was it was working in reverse. It was, I was only really able to communicate with my friends in Germany through social networking. And so that's how I got into this. And then when, it's coming, I think it's coming. In 2005, I had that experience that most parents have when their children go to college. And I was very excited that Facebook was open to professors, and so that was how I began working with her. So what I'd like for you to do is to look at this image on the screen now and think about these social media, social networking spaces, and ask yourself, how many of these 16 do you use? And is your life also a web of social networking? So how many of you participate in at least one of these spaces? Okay, how many of you participate in 5 or more? All right. So it's you can kind of look up there now and see when these came about and how long it might have taken you personally to think about how do I move into this space. And if you're not in some of these spaces, is there a gap between when this came out and your use of it? What I think we would all agree with, those of us that are in social spaces, is that the way that we learn has shifted dramatically because of that, and we're really becoming participants more so than we were. So this was my foray into Facebook, and what I found was, first it was purely social for me, interacting with my daughter, but then we began to think about how could I leverage this for school. And what I found myself using my social space for was first advertising the study abroads. So it's really about push out information. And then beginning to develop some friend groups, and then commenting, and then finally becoming an active participant and posting and being involved that way. But that wasn't working for the teachers that I worked with, and maybe you've encountered a similar problem. The teachers in my area can't be part of Facebook community, because in some cases that means that they could lose their job if anyone else posts something. And I've actually had colleagues in other states that have called me up and said, please take down that picture of the dinner we were at. There was a bottle of wine on the table. So to engage my students, I moved into a Ning environment because I had more control over who was able to see it, and it was a more closed network in a sense. And so I used this to help my students interact with one another, and what I found was that the common aspects of Facebook were easily transferable for the students. What I hoped was that I would create a community of practice that would go across more than one semester. So I've invited students who were in my class and have graduated remain on the Ning, and as the course comes up again, they can all continue to participate and use each other as resources.
Did you hear that Virginia Tech took down all their wikis because of that very factor, that they're letting kids go back to the names, or back to their wikis?
No, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, and they said it violated, they decided it violated FERPA, so they stopped allowing any uses of wikis because past students could go back and look at new student work, and they decided it was a violation of FERPA. And they had they were one of the first wikis of freedom of educational...
Rights to Privacy Act.
Privacy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the thing that I do to kind of hedge that, and I hope that I'm not going to get myself in trouble, is I send out a mass mailing to every member that's currently a member, explain to them I'm opening the NING again to new students. Would they like to stay in the community? So anyone who asks to leave, I immediately take them down and move them out. I hadn't thought about it in the reverse, that they were seeing that the new students may not want to participate because of that. It's an interesting idea.
I'll post that link to the article.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that. So, thinking about social media use at my own school, a colleague of mine, Fran Smith, who's at CAST right now, and I did a little research looking at how were our students, our personal students that we worked with in the School of Education, looking at academic and personal use of social media, social networking in particular as well. And what we found was that I'm very much like them, I guess is what I'd say. I began using social networking as a personal endeavor, and then it's become an academic endeavor. And so across time,
No.
There.
No. Yes.
well, I was just going to go the other way. That's right. Across time, what I see in myself, and you may also be like this, is myself moving from an inactive person in social networking along the continuum to where I'm creating and publishing. So have a look at those and think about, where do you fit at this moment?
Who's that from?
Groundswell.
It's underneath that.
Okay, I just wanted-
Yeah. And so that, I would say across time then, what's happened with me is I've become more engaged in a multiple set of social networks. I have my LinkedIn for my more business professional activities, and then I have my things that I'm using for logging my photographs of my family, and I've really become actively involved. And so this sort of brings me in my journey from being an inactive person and more of a follower to a creator. And it brings me finally to my newest social network spot, which is the highlighted tool for today. And it's Mendeley. How many of you use Mendeley? Okay, so
For the show, I guess.
I guess this will be interesting for you then, I hope anyway.
Never heard of him.
Mendeley comes in two parts. The first part is called Mendeley Desktop, and what you're looking at is a view of a Mendeley Desktop. And I use the desktop to pull up and to organize the PDFs, papers, and information, research information in my life. And that's why I joined it. A colleague of mine said, hey, this is a really cool spot for you to organize your work. And so you can see in the center of this, the little green dots indicate articles that have been uploaded onto the desktop. And what the program does is it pulls out the metadata from the article itself and categorizes it by showing the author, the title, the date, and so you pull that all out. The other thing it does is it strips the back of the data so that the resources that are in the reference section are also pulled into it.
Are you saying you've got the PDFs of all those articles on your machine?
Once you install it, it searches your computer for every single PDF,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
categorizes and puts them in one folder.
Right. And
So all the PDFs you already have, it's like iTunes for your PDFs.
Right, so you pull it all into one spot. But what makes it more functional, rather than just having everything in one big giant line, are the things over here. You can see filter by authors, so I can go in and look for, oh, I remember so-and-so wrote a piece on, and I can pull it up that way. But also if you look up here, you can see that they're organized by category. And so that's also very helpful, and then it also has a more detailed version of the article.
And see, it says how it says notes. You can type your notes when you're reading right there, and the notes are permanently attached to the PDF.
What kind of confusion does it have when you have several computers and you download different articles on?
Not bad at all.
Really?
Yeah, what I do is I'll have,
You can see.
I hack mine back. After this, I'll show you how to really set it up nice,
Okay.
but there's a lot you can do
If
it.
you want to actually buy stuff,
It's all
it's
open
still
source.
online,
Yeah, I mean, you can pay, we'll get into it.
You can always print.
So anyway, the desktop activity is one part, but then there's also Mendeley website. And that allows us to look at the social aspects.
Can I
of
just
this.
say one thing first?
Yeah, please.
And then what it does is there's a plugin for Word, so your citations and your bibliographies are written for you. I mean, they're only as good as the information, just like EndNote or just like RefWorks.
Right.
Yeah. Works better
Well, what
than
it's
that.
combining is not just the ability to organize your research information, but also it adds on the website of Mendeley, adds a social aspect to it. So this is Ian's profile, and I just like his little guy
Did you draw
on
that?
top. But it allows you to upload some
Mies,
information about
little
yourself.
animated.
You can see that what his research interests are. Then you can see a list of his publications. So he's uploaded his own information. You can also, below, if we could go below this, you can see a spot to upload your grants and awards. Over here, similar to other social networks, it allows us to have contacts. And this, I think, is particularly cool. It looks at who's reading us and who's downloading us. And so it's graphing the, I would say, the clout or the value of our work in a sense.
How is that different than academic.edu?
It's very similar, except it's connected to all the PDFs on my computer.
Yeah, academia.edu is basically just this online social part.
Yes.
The real power of Mendeley, among other things, is the fact that it'll give you like the iTunes for your PDFs. Plus, you can sync it across multiple machines.
We all do both.
Yeah. Plus, the iPad app is really nice. The Android app is getting there.
The other thing I think that I like is being able to join groups that have similar interests. And so this is from my group page. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to experiment with this in my class this coming spring. And so what I've done is I've organized a group for my course. And typically this course is an action research class, and I've used a wiki in the past to have students build a resource library for each other that can continue across semesters. And so what I want them to do is kind of build this library together. And fortunately, my students this semester are really working on very similar topics, so it will make it for a nice library on reading workshop and writing workshop. The other thing you can do is you can invite people to your groups, and so this is, again, going back to Ian's page, and these, you can see on the left the groups that he's been invited to join. It's listing the number of papers and also how many members are currently in the group. And so as the group grows, it's great. There's also sort of a little Twitter-esque aspect to this in that people can follow you. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to see who's interested in your work, and it helps you to develop a community of practice.
2 members for online reading content.
Yeah, it's Ian and I probably.
Well, I
And
mean,
remember, it's growing.
It's
No.
gotta
a new-
grow.
it's
I can-
obviously, if you are not using it, the people in this
Well,
room,
the-
this is a new kind of
just
tool
kidding.
for us.
no,
If you
the,
click on like law or linguistics, there's hundreds of linguistic groups with hundreds of members.
I can tell you because I've been messing around with it for a while. The groups aspect and the community aspect is tough to do. These groups here, these are groups that I had, and I'm like, oh, online reading comprehension. How many people in my life do I know that are interested in online reading comprehension? There's, a good number of people, but what I mentioned to, I think you might get to it, is I have a class, New Lit Research and Practice, that I teach. So I put the syllabus up there, and then I put all the lit for the class, all the PDFs that I would use. Now I have, people all around the world will subscribe to it and go in, and they're and I'll keep it updated. So I'm thinking, for my classes, I'd sit there and print out the PDF with the syllabus, here's the stuff. I might just do a Mendeley group, have the kids sign in and say, okay, here we are in the group, here's the literature that we're using, here's the lit we used to use, and it's all up there, they can go find it themselves.
And I like the aspect of being able to upload your own work and to have a sense of who is interested in the same things as you. And I think that would be really helpful. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn this over to Greg. He's going to talk a little bit about participatory assessment.
For those of you who know us, know our work, we've been doing a lot of work in traditional comprehension assessment, but
That's a sissy using us.
Did you see the spelling error?
where?
Participatory assessment.
Oh, awesome. I handmade this slide.
It was a rough night.
I like that assment though.
That's a good way to look at it. But we're also, in our spare time, when we're not, spending forever making multiple choice distractors, we're really interested in looking at, well, how can we really push assessment for these social networks? And you can't, there's no bubble you can fill in to see if kids are participating. And we've been working on this project with, in the state of Connecticut, we have a technical high school system. It's 18 schools across the entire state in one school district. And we've been trying to create a portfolio assessment system for them. But they're looking for a nice shiny product that just as a repository. And we are looking for, let's really try to get at the process and get these kids to not learn about their career choice, but to learn to be their career choice. And I think we've always looked at assessment as, trying to get that learn about, and we're trying to get to that learn to be. You can't read it up there. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Hickey's work at, I think he's at Indiana University. He's doing on remediating 21st century assessment. Phenomenal stuff. Phenomenal stuff. He's he calls himself a reformed psychometrician, now looking at situated assessment. And he argues that 21st century skills can't be measured because we're really trying to, looking at collaboration, looking at, navigation. Those are practices within social contexts. And what's going on with those is that those are social practices, and if you strip the context, you no longer have those practices. However, they say that there might be some kind of, they call it the residual learning, like what's left over after the social practices, that maybe you could come up with some valid and reliable measures that get kind of the echo effects of practicing, of learning, that if you build these social practices, that you can maybe measure some of the echoes of learning. And he obviously built off of Jenkins's 11 proficiencies, looking at this is what would be needed. Play, well, I'm not going to read them, but basically a little bit different than just, comprehension. Can you find the main idea? Can you put two ideas together? And when you're looking at different forms of assessment, if you're looking at assessment in social networks, that's where you have to really look at I hate to sound like so cliche, but looking at the processes versus the product of learning. And that's what we've been trying to do in our assessment practices. So last year at the study group, a lot of the teachers said, I do discussion boards, but I have no idea how do I assess them? What do I do with them? And I'm like, well, it's, a little bit better than that, but what we've been trying to do, here's an example. The teacher put up a prompt, and then the student wrote back, the teacher wrote back, try to be more specific. What in the top three, or this is the discussion director, what is the top three reasons suggested in the book is realistic, then the other student wrote more. So instead of looking for gains of knowledge just in their final answer, I try to look for gains of knowledge in how the students leave feedback for each other or in their own reflection pieces. So at first, every student's comment's always like, good post, way to go.
Right.
And then what you want, hopefully you get to the point where, well, I really found your central argument to be a little weak. Maybe if you found better support, and then I know, I'm not assessing their writing, but I know that their writing ability is better because the way that they're critiquing each other. So I'm looking for growth in writing skills, not so much in the product in their final essay, but in the feedback that they leave each other, and trying to get that element of participation. One thing that I'm also trying to push are using more multimodal elements in their actual posts, but unfortunately that's a screenshot of Moodle, and to do those kinds of things you kind of need to know a little bit of HTML. So that's been a little bit harder of a push because you got to just teach some basic coding. But that's where I'm heading now. I'm just going away. The other things that we've done is we used a lot of video evidence of learning because it's a technical high school. Like, I can write down, oh, I can change, I can use this digital altimeter on a resume, or we can have the kids, they've been creating tutorials of using digital altimeters and posting them on TeacherTube or YouTube, and that's what they're doing. So instead of just taking a test on what's a digital altimeter, they have to make a tutorial video that teaches other people how to do it. And that's learning to be, because that's what they're going to have to do. And then they can go to a potential employer, or because most don't go to college, they either go to college or a lot just enter the workforce at technical high school, and they, here's me actually doing stuff.
Where do they post that?
That's on TeacherTube. Now, where we've moved, and then it's all connected to this great tool called Mahara and Moodle together. But you can use you can use Google Sites for this. You can use wiki spaces. You don't need to. Mahara is amazing.
It gets into e-portfolios.
Yeah.
We do work in e-portfolios also.
And I'll talk a little bit about that. Oops, wrong way. So hold on, let me just show you. Yeah, so it's Mahara. I mean, you need server space, and it's a product out of New Zealand.
You've heard of Moodle?
Yes.
Mahara is basically the same thing. It's a plugin, or it's a alternative version of Moodle. It's more of a social network. It's really nice. It's really slick.
It's so powerful.
Is it cost
Yeah.
money?
No,
It's all free. It's open source. The issue is, number one, you
there's
have to have
always a
server
cost to open
space.
source and free, though, and it's not a lot
It's
of
server
money.
space. You have a web hoster, or you have your own server running.
Sometimes I understand why some people just want to spend the money on a product.
Yeah.
It's going to take forever. It's not loading. So with that being said, Jonathan's going to come up and just talk about some current research designs that we've been seeing as people are starting to investigate social networks. And again, we're around it every day at noon in the Cyber Cafe. If you want to learn more about Mendeley, Mahara, or any tool, you have a tech question, we're there every day at noon. Feel free to come in and just ask.
So one of the ideas that's out right now is this idea of ethnography, which is essentially ethnography online, because it's faster, it's cheaper, it's easier than doing a traditional ethnography because there's so much stuff right there. I just capture everything online. It's automatically archived right there for me. It's fantastic. This idea of ethnography actually comes out of a business model. A whole lot of the research being done is with business advertising and that type of field, and it's actually kind of interesting because there's a lot of other work that's kind of looking at that and looking at these social networking spaces and critiquing it. Like out of communication, there's stuff like the political economy of communication, which is looking at issues of consumer labor, and essentially people are getting online and providing information about themselves for the company to then harvest and use. And it's an interesting critique of the business model of this type of information. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that idea of ethnography because it looks at it as a very limited thing. As Leander points out, that we need to move away from that kind of binary of online, offline, because there really is a whole lot of crossover there. And so instead of looking at digital spaces as standalone, I mean, it's connected. We're connecting to people through these spaces. We're connecting in the grander sense. A whole lot of the ethnographic work that's going on is, within education particularly, is looking at learner participation and creativity and online identity formation. Some really good stuff is coming out of the Pew Internet Family Life Project and the MacArthur Foundation, Digital Media and Learning. A whole lot of really in-depth studies. They're looking primarily at kind of usage issues and some perception stuff. The hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, is anyone familiar with that? That was a huge, huge study with tons and tons of people on it, looking at adolescent use of digital spaces and kind of what they're doing. They categorized it all into basically three big things: that they're hanging out with their friends, they're messing around, playing with stuff, and they're geeking out. They're becoming experts in certain things, and they're kind of expressing that expertise. But that full text is actually online, so if you feel like reading 441 pages on your screen, I'm going to update this with a whole lot of links and stuff, and so it's all going to be linked up right here. Some of the other stuff that's going on is looking at, more specifically, some content analysis protocols. There's some different frames to this. First is we're looking at information, looking at what they're posting about themselves, kind of how they're portraying their personal information. There's also more the technical side, the kinds of frequencies and the kinds of forms. How often are they posting? What are they posting? What kind of medium is it in? Are they posting original content? Are they posting reposted content? Kind of how are they negotiating those types of things? And a final thing, I think that this is actually one of the really interesting things about it. What they post isn't the only thing that's important. What other people post is also important. Dana Boyd writes about the idea of the destruction of the physical world through social networking sites, where I used to have complete separation between, my standing here as a presenter versus me at a bar in my hometown. Those used to be very separate things, but now in social networking sites, those things are really smashed together. And so negotiating what other people post is also a form of your own identity. Has anybody ever deleted something that someone else has posted on your blog or on your Facebook wall?
Yeah, all the time.
Many times.
And it's one of those things, sometimes it's kind of spammy stuff, but every so often I have some friends that know that I've got professional kinds of things with different social networking sites, and they'll come into those and they'll post wildly inappropriate things just to see how long it takes me to delete it and how fast I am on it.
I went a step further. I made Twitter my professional face and then took off anybody that has any kind of relation on Facebook and just kept it for family and friends. Of course, I never go on Facebook anymore, but yeah, no, I separated. I made one my personal space and one my professional space. It was just, I was also jealous of my friends who you could post whatever they wanted.
Right.
Like I got sick of like having to monitor, and I wanted a fun space.
Right, and that's one of those things too, and so I think that speaks to a whole lot of the migration too, and that's something else we have to look at with the technical aspect is what tools are being used for what. Remember Google Wave, anyone?
Yeah.
For a hot minute.
Okay, yeah, for the hot
it's
minute.
gone now.
And that it came up and there was a sudden rush of people who were really interested in it, but then it fell off. And I think that the people that got into that, it was a very particular
Circles throughout a week.
people.
What was that intended to do, Google Wave?
I do love Google Plus though. I mean, nobody uses it. It's only for but nobody's there. But it's.
That's why
I like
I started it, and then I just went, there's nothing here.
If you like reading technology stuff, there's a lot of good tech circles.
Yeah.
But like nobody I know is there.
Yeah.
But they have to, but Facebook took time too,
Yeah.
I'm there.
you know?
Oh, that's right. I do know you.
I'm there.
Facebook.
I like it.
And with the question of what was Google Wave for, I think that was its ultimate problem, is it did so many different things, but it essentially looked like a chat.
It was nothing I couldn't do in AOL Instant Messenger in 1999.
Well, but then it had all the robots though, like it had so much potential,
Yeah.
but the learning curve was too high, and it seemed just like any other chat forum.
Yeah, don't you remember that quit
ultimately failed.
Facebook move last year? I was at a tech conference at the University of Victoria, where everybody was just ready to hit the button and get themselves off of Facebook. That had to do with like all your information was now in someone else's hands. Because I saw my face. Wouldn't you like to be friends with so and so on a network that I belonged to that had nothing to do with work? And I went, oh my goodness, this just hit 1 million people. But then one of my friends who I had refused to befriend, like a personal friend, I said, look, for work, I don't use Facebook for anything but work. I'm sorry, I can't friend you. I can't friend my nieces and nephews. Well, guess what? That network took the other network stuff, and then she blasted around, happy birthday, 50th, Karen, all over the place.
And you said, I'm 35.
And the weird thing was, this also went out to over 1.5 million people, and I kept thinking, there's my little face, and there's this message, and my friend being, because I have crazy friends, and I like them for that.
I think it's negotiating your identity.
It
It's
ruins
very
your
different
profession.
now like the ability to be a professional separate from my personal self is not as possible.
Right.
But when I talk with my own personal children, they don't see that as being an issue.
Right.
There's one them, the them they are.
Yeah, because they haven't been to court yet, or they haven't.
Right, or they don't have responsibility, but the question is how much effort do professionals really put into policing their identity, creating their identity, even marketing or branding yourself?
Well, I tried to put a paper into our national conference, and it was rejected. Oh, no, that never happens, you know. But until it's happened to you and your total identity has been taken away by somebody else, reframed by somebody else.
Well, I mean, Julie Coiro got me back into blogging. I am a failed blogger. You know, I'll admit it. But she brought me back into it. So on the IRA blog, that I put a post on there 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, about you have to have an online brand. You have to create and curate your brand, because all of us, I mean, we've had discussions, especially with the YouTube piece of, well, I don't want stuff online, stuff shouldn't go online, we shouldn't have that. The fact of the matter is, you're already online. Okay, if you're not putting stuff on there and creating content and curating it,
Somebody's gonna do it for you.
somebody else is doing it. If you Google yourself, something's going to come up. So if you don't put something else, the other stuff that people put up there, or the stuff that some ad campaign or whatever put up, that's what's going to represent you now.
And for me, as a new academic, who eventually has to think, well, I have to, sometime down the road, write a book. I'd rather cultivate an audience now looking for a book than 5 years write a book looking for an audience.
The thing is, you have an audience. You know, we're doing personnel searches now. We only glance at the CV. We'll be talking to each other about what we found online about that person. And you think, there's someone, we had this person applying for a research job, and a blog entry said, oh, another bad day at the office. I spent all morning interviewing, and this person just had no information that related to my research question at all, so I had to dump the interview. You know, and I thought, oh, is that how you're going to behave as a researcher on our project? Goodbye.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we've always joked that the lab will do reviews, as does everybody here, about how pointless, like, blinded research is. You know, when you send out stuff for review or for a conference, how you blind your name and stuff like that. Within about 35 seconds using Google, you can figure out exactly who it is. And we've all done that game.
Yeah.
You read it and you're like, well, who is this? And you Google it, and about 30 seconds later, you know exactly who it is.
Unblinded proposals are almost more anonymous.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you see the author, blank, blank, you just take that sentence and it's no longer blind.
If you put education, Nottingham, Colin, I come up number 1. It's 2 million. But it's just really scary what happens.
And with that idea of that connectedness, there's actually kind of pulling out of this type of thing of those connections is there's also network analysis going on, where they're actually looking at the, I guess not really tangible, but the kind of digital web of the network of who are you friends with, who are they friends with, how is all this interconnected, and just kind of really analyzing how those connections work so that when something gets tweeted about your birthday, you know, exactly what channels did this go through and how did this get dispersed. And with that, there's a whole lot of software that helps to do with that. One of the top-rated free network analysis softwares right now is Wireshark. It's kind of one of those popular free apps because there's a lot of really expensive ones, but free is always nice. Another really good resource is actually Dana Boyd on her website. She's got a working social networking site bibliography of research that's going on. It's absolutely not a complete bibliography. Currently there's about 465 articles on there that people have kind of given to her saying, hey, here's some stuff. Actually, right now, education is really poorly represented in her bibliography. So I really kind of, if I have some time in the next few weeks, I really kind of want to blast a whole lot of education links to her to say, we want to be there too. But a whole lot of it is really business related because that's where a whole lot of the research comes in, that business marketing, that, you know, how do businesses brand themselves in social networking sites?
So, just for clarity, what does Wireshark do?
It's a network analysis tool, and so it tracks IPs and tracks how people are networked within the sites. To be honest with you, it's not something I have too much experience with. I've looked at some different tools. This is one that just has received some higher ratings. than others, but there's definitely a lot of different tools. So essentially, you can plug this in, and it's almost think about it like a mind map of things, that you have this person, and then it's webbed out to who they're connected to and who those are connected to.
Imagine running that for like all of our wireless access and stuff here at LRA.
Yeah.
I have a student who's using that, and what she's looking at is she's analyzing a principal's blog, where instead of principals write the content, and then she's looking at how the connections are made between other administrators, and then she's looking at what are the strengths of those connections. So do you have more social capital if you have a stronger, like here's one note of this principal, another note of this principal, and if he's read repeatedly from outside, does he have more social capital within his field, and how is knowledge created through them?
And it's something we have to do here at LRA. They're talking about, well, we need to drive traffic to the website. Well, if you want to drive traffic to the website, you need to be cross-posting to Twitter and to Facebook. So every time we upload a paper to the repository, send out that link on Facebook, send out that link on Twitter, and that
Make people want to go there.
That's where the teachers are. I mean, if you've ever, I'm not a huge fan, but I do ed chats on Twitter occasionally on Tuesdays, and I don't know if anybody knows it. It's one of the first educational hashtags, and it's done at 12 and 7 because for teachers both in England and here. But there's sometimes 20,000 teachers that are talking at the same time. It's been the most. It's usually about 500 to 600, but they vote on a topic.
Right.
Like 100 people vote.
Right.
And then there's a conversation.
And it's all done through Twitter.
So the teachers are there, and if we want to send our work out, you upload it to the repository, take the link, throw it on Facebook, throw it on Twitter, and you drive traffic.
Right.
So how about we open up to just kind of